Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial on Cinema 4D objects and modeling modes. In this video I will show you how to create objects, resize them, adjust their parameters, and make them editable. I also cover selection methods, modeling modes, and a few modeling tools. This is Pete Merrick with Triplet 3D, and I'll be your host. Alright, let's jump right into Cinema 4D. And right up here at the top of the menu you'll find your objects. So to undock this, you just grab this little nub right here, and that'll undock this, this whole menu. So we could take this and we could just dock it right on the right hand side so we could see it a little bit bigger. And then I'll right click and I'll go icons, large icons, and then rows. I'm going to do one row so I have all my objects right here on the right hand side. If I just click on one of them, it's going to create a disk, and you'll see it also shows up in the objects manager. And this applies to all of the objects which are parametric primitives, and what that means is as soon as you create an object you're going to get these parameters in the attributes manager. So what this will allow you to do is resize your objects. In the case of the disk, you can also resize the inner radius. You can control the amount of disk segments and the amount of rotation segments. So if you wanted this thing to be really jagged, you would just take the rotation segments down and you would get a jagged edge. So the smoother you want it, the more rotation segments that you want to add. There's also a little feature called the slice. So if in the attributes manager, if you want to show more than one tab, if you just click and hold and drag over two tabs, that'll make two tabs visible. So right here it's called, there's a slice button. So what this does is it literally lets you control the amount of the radius of how much you're going to see your object. So we could just change this from 180, and these are all animatable parameters as well. So if you wanted to animate this thing growing into a full 360, you can do that. Just delete that. There's a few other ones that allow you to use the slice function, like the torus. You know, if you wanted a half a torus, you could turn on the slice function. And this works the exact same way where you have these parameters. Here's the ring radius and then the pipe radius. So we can make this really small and thin, or we can make it really fat. And that's how you control those. Alright. Another thing is the orientation of your objects. So all the objects have this orientation. Right now it's in the plus Y. So what that means is the Y is up and it's pointing to the right over here. So if I go minus Y, the only difference is we're going to see this pointing to the left hand side, this little yellow line. We can also change this rotation to the X. That changes it that way. To the Z, now it's pointing kind of towards the back. And all of the parametric primitives, the objects have this orientation built right into them. Same thing with this one. You can resize it right here using the size controls. And one thing specific about this cube is that you can actually add fillets on the edges of this right away. So right here where it says fillet in the objects tab, fillet, if you add a fillet it's going to round all of your corners. And the way that you control the radius is this radius button right here and the amount of subdivisions. So you could just do one subdivision. What ends up happening is it's not very clear right now once you add that fillet. So what you could do is go into the Fong tag, and if you take the Fong and you just bring it down to, let's say, 20% or so, now I'll take another render. Now you can see those edges are a little bit more defined. Here's the first render, here's the second render. So that's how you define those edges a little bit better. So if you increase the subdivisions, what's going to happen is you're going to get a rounded corner. So again, here's one subdivision. We have this little straight edge here. But if we increase this, it gets rounder and rounder. And I'll just take another render to demonstrate. See that all the edges are now round. It's kind of a nice feature. And the cube has the fillet that's available. Another one that has the fillet is cylinder. So instead of these sharp 90-degree angles right here from the sides to the top, we can actually add a fillet on this, and we can control that fillet the exact same way that we control the cube. It's a nice little feature. Next one I want to show you is the sphere. So right now we just have the basic sphere. It comes in at almost 40 inches. So So here's how we control the size of that. We can control the segments here, and the less segments that we have, the more polygonal it's going to look in the renderer. So let me just show you this little feature down here. It's called render perfect. So right now, if I take a render of this, the sides are not really refined. We'd have to go back into our Phong tag like we did in the previous one and just take our Phong tag down to, I don't know, 30, 20, something like that. Now when we take a render, we actually see all the sides pretty defined. But one of the other cool things about this sphere object is you can actually use a render perfect. So if I check this button, render perfect, then I take another rendering, it's going to render it as a real sphere. Again, if I uncheck it, take a rendering, it comes up jagged sides per the number of segments that we specified. Render perfect, it renders a perfect sphere. And the useful thing about this is, let's say for instance, if you have 100, 200, 1,000 spheres duplicated, the render perfect is going to save a lot of render time just because there's less polygons to calculate for Cinema 4D. So that's a nice little feature to consider if you have a lot of geometry. So landscape, this is a pretty cool little object. What we can do here is in the size attributes. So again, we can control the width, the height, the depth of this landscape. And right down here, if you play with the rough furrows, you can get more roughness, less roughness, fine furrows, and that's pretty much how that works right there. It's pretty straightforward. Plateau level, so it's going to start flattening out as you decrease this plateau level. And we can bring this the height down a little bit like that. So that's how that's controlled. And again, you have your orientation here. You could change the direction that this comes into the scene at. I just leave it at my +y. Another nice little feature here is, let me just change this plateau level again back to its original plateau, increase the height. So seed, that's going to make different configurations if you change the seed number. Another one, if you don't want your edges really straight, is undo borders at sea level, and that's going to give you a little bit rougher terrain, and it's not going to give you those straight edges on the side. Another thing is you can actually turn this into a sphere that kind of looks like a meteor or comet or something. You can go back in and use these parameters to adjust it a little bit and make it a little bit more rough. So that's the landscape object. If I uncheck spherical, I get back to my regular landscape. The last thing that I wanted to show you is the relief object. So right now, if I create a relief object, this really doesn't do too much. What we have to do is we have to assign a texture, like an image, to be used as a sort of bump map or displacement map for this relief object to show up. So right now, if I take a rendering, nothing shows up. So let's go to the relief object, and where it says texture, I'll just import an image. I'll import this skeleton, and I'll hit no. So what happens is I have this image of a skeleton, just a rough drawing that I did, and if I import that into the relief texture, it's going to give me a piece of geometry that roughly resembles my sketch. So here's what's happening. It's actually taking a plane and it's displacing this plane to come up with that image. So the black portions of the actual sketch get pushed down, and the white portions are the topmost portions. And you can control this as well by the top level. So if you wanted to make an animation of this thing actually happening or creating itself, you can use that. Bottom level, that's another one that you can control. So those are the two ways that you can control it. If you wanted more definition in this image, it's looking a little squished. I'm going to push it out. If you wanted more definition, you would just add more width segments and more depth segments, and that'll define your image a little bit better. Something like that. So that's the relief object. And now I want to show you another really important feature. It's called the make editable. So let's just start with a cube, and I'll go into my display mode, garage shading lines, and just add a few segments. And I'll make the height a little bit bigger, something like that. Add a few more segments to the Y, and one more to the Z. Okay, so there's a cube. All right, so right now I'm still, this cube is still a parametric primitive. So what that means is I still have access to all these parameters over here. I can make it taller, I can make it wider, I can make it a little bit deeper, all by using these numbers right here. So once I make it editable, right now, like I said, we have access to all these parameters, but we can't access the lines, the edges, or the polygons of this object. So to do that, what we're going to need to do is we're going to click on the object, and there's an icon over here in the top left-hand corner. It's called Make Editable. So if we click that, you'll notice in the Attributes Manager all of our parameters disappear, like our width, our height, and our depth. And we can no longer go back. So if we hit undo right away, it's going to undo that and make it a parametric primitive again. But if we start to manipulate it, we can't go back and make it non-editable. So make sure your cube is, your geometry is the exact size that you want to work with. So that brings us over to the modes. So this is our point mode, and when I click it, you'll see that I have all these points that I can select. And the way that we select points in Cinema 4D, there's something called a live selection tool, and there's different selection methods as well, which I'll show you in a minute. But this is the live selection tool, so we can literally go in here and pick these points and start to manipulate them, reshape this cube that we created. So that's the point mode. Here's the edge mode. I can select my edges and start changing the shape of this. I could select my polygons and start pushing and pulling these polygons. All right, let's go back into our point mode and let's go into the front view. So one super important aspect of this live selection tool is this button in the attribute manager called Only Select Visible Elements. And when this is checked, look what happens. Let's just increase this radius of this live selection. So I'm going to select, click and drag across this whole top row of points. And with this Only Select Visible Elements checked, look what ends up happening with this. We only selected the points that we can see in the front view, right? So now with this element unchecked, this little checkbox, Only Select Visible Elements, with that unchecked, if I do the same thing and I click and drag this whole top row of points, what ends up happening is it selects all the way through the object, right? So it selected all the points that are on the top of this cube. All right, so we could do the exact same thing on some other points, like if we just go click, drag, and select those points right there, it's selecting all the way through the object. And let's say, for instance, that you want to deselect some of these points. If you hold down Control and you just click one of the points, that deselects it. So this works the same with polygon mode as well, in the line mode. So in polygon mode, if we have Only Select Visible Elements unchecked and I select all the way through this, it's going to select around our entire piece of geometry and select all those polygons. One of the things you want to try to avoid when you have Only Select Visible Elements unchecked in the perspective view is, let's say we only wanted these two polygons selected and we're in the perspective view, Only Select Visible Elements is unchecked. If I rotate around, look what happened. I accidentally selected polygons on the other side. So that's one thing you want to be kind of careful of when you're selecting polygons in perspective view. So now that I checked Only Select Visible Elements, now this is it's not selecting through my geometry. A few other things that I wanted to show you are the types of selection methods with the live selection tool. So if I just create not a plane, I want to create a polygon. So I'll create a polygon. Where can I find you? Here you are. And I'm going to increase the segments of this, just like that. A few more. That looks good. And then I'm going to make this editable. I'm going to go to my points, and I'm going to select all four corners of my polygon. All right. So at this point, if I just want to take these points and push them up, I'll take a render of this so you can see what that looks like. So that's with the normal mode. Here's the live selection, and my mode for the live selection tool is normal. All right, I'm going to deselect by clicking in an empty area and go soft selection. First, let's undo that. So let's go soft selection. I wanted to undo my points that I manipulated. So if I select the soft selection and then select all four of my points, and now I click and drag up, it's going to drag up in a softer fashion and manipulate this a little bit differently. So now if I take a rendering, here's the difference. These are sharp corners over here, Oops, I'll go back to this. Here's the sharp corners, and now we have a softer type of selection that happened on this plane. And I could better demonstrate this on a landscape object. So here's our landscape object. If I make this editable, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in my polygon mode and increase the radius of my tool. So this is the soft selection. Again, we're still on that. So I'll just raise this up, take a rendering. That's what that looks like. If I unselect, undo, and I go back to my selection tool and just hit normal, now when I select these polygons and I push up on them, look what happens. So there's the difference between using soft selection and normal selection. So now I wanted to show you a few different selection tools. Alright, now I'm going to make this editable. And I'm going to go to my selection menu up here, and I'm just going to rip it off, undock it. So now in my line mode, there's something called a loop selection. So if I click my loop selection, I can select like the outline of something. Same with this. Ring selection, this will select all the way around all the lines. We can grow the selection. That's a nice little feature. It'll just add to the selection. If I had more than this selected, I can take these and shrink selection, but I'll get rid of it. When you are texturing, sometimes you want to add two different textures of two different parts of an object. So this set selection key, or icon right here, really comes in handy for texturing. So if I wanted like a red on the bottom and like a black texture on the top, if I select those polygons and hit set selection, this is going to give me a selection around my polygons. So let's just name this bottom and then hit enter. And that's good. So I can always go back in and double click the selection and I'll reselect that. Alright, a few other tools that I wanted to show you before we wrap this up are some of the modeling tools. So if I go in here and I select my cube and I select some of these sides with my selection tool, live select tool, bring down this radius, select these polygons right here, select these. If you right click, it'll give you a whole bunch of modeling tools. So here's the extrusion tool, and the way that works, you click on an empty area, right click and extrude, and when you let go and if you want to do it again, what ends up happening is you get another segment. You see that? So we got one segment right here in the middle and then it extruded again. That's a nice little feature. Another nice tool is the extrude inner. So if we click on an empty area and start dragging to the left, that's going to give us more polygons in the center of this selection. And then I can do another extrude it in. Say for instance if I was creating a window in a building, and then I can extrude inner, create the mullions, and extrude again. So that's like a little window area, and it did it to both sides. Little tool is the extrude matrix. So I'll extrude these out once, and then I'll extrude, matrix extrude, and then if I click and drag, look at the shape that makes. It's kind of an interesting little feature. So I'll just undo that. The knife tool, this is nice in case that in case you didn't add enough geometry into your cube before you made it editable, you can always go back in and add more geometry. So with if you right click, knife tool, and then in mode, if you want to draw more polygons all the way around this, or more edges rather, go into loop and make sure restrict to selection is unchecked. And now if I click, that's giving me another line. And I can do this all the way around if I wanted to add more geometry to this. One last tool is, let's say for instance if I have a hole, so I just selected this polygon, I hit delete. Let's say we have a hole in our geometry. Sometimes we need to bridge that or make a polygon for that. So what I could do is go into my line mode, right click, bridge, and then select the top line and the bottom line, and it's going to create a polygon and close that off. Alright, this is Pete Merrick with Triplet 3D. Hope you enjoyed this lesson, and thanks for watching.